Hello, and welcome to the podcast. Kate Kennedy from Be There in 5. How you doing?
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. I was just telling you, I feel like I'm among TikTok celebrity, and I'm honored to be on your podcast.
Slay. Well, I'm so excited to have you on because when I first started getting into podcasts, and you always ask friends for suggestions, your podcast far and away was the number one suggestion. And I think the first one I listened to was an episode you did talking about how people on TikTok will try to diagnose you with things. Do you remember that?
Yes, talk therapy. I had a therapist on, and I was like, hey, so is it chill that I'm diagnosing myself with like disassociation at all hours of the night? Like,
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
and
that was a fun one.
It was a great concept too. And your podcast covers pop culture topics, but I'm sure if I had to think of one word to describe kind of what you talk about and how you go about conversations, it would definitely be the word thoughtful. Because I feel like sometimes you do deep dives on things or you pick apart observations. Do you consider your podcast pop culture, or do you kind of consider it trending topics and everything in between?
I think it depends on your definition of pop culture. Because, yeah, when I'm like deep diving sorority culture or like being a bridesmaid, people are like, that's not pop culture. But I kind of expand that definition to zeitgeist almost, like the thoughts and things and attitudes, beliefs, objects, media, entertainment, culture that comprise a certain like spirit of a time. And a lot of what I cover is kind of like nostalgic, or when millennials were kind of surrounding college aged, or, I'll try to like cover things that are in our orbit, but maybe aren't entertainment forward like an E-News would cover. Like, I don't think E-News cares what the Scala sisters are up to, but like I do. So it's kind of, it depends. It completely depends. But I think what happened is over the years, I got a little bit less engaged with like celebrity gossip, just to keep myself kind of interested and thoughtful, like you said, trying to dive into things. And I thought there were more interesting pockets of our existence to dive into. So I try to pick things that are popular, like TikTok mental health videos, and then understand what it means and how they impact us.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, too. Pop culture used to be who's wearing what on the red carpet, but now we almost kind of have like discourse pop culture where people talk about gaslighting or quiet quitting or things like that. And these phrases, they're on the news, but they're also things that you see on Twitter. It's like this weird blend of like, I don't know, maybe it's just the fact that everyone's got an opinion now being on social media for the last like 20 years, but there is, pop culture with celebrities, and then there's trending topics that like everybody talks about, but it's not the news.
Right. And I kind of love that this evolution of the world, because it puts such significance and importance to like the culture of our everyday and the culture of our existence in a way we used to put on a pedestal only for celebrities to think was interesting. But now it's interesting if you're a kid who likes corn. Now it's like democratized across like everything. So I love being able to like celebrate our lives in that way and find importance in these small things. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, and I mean, like corn, I think that kid would kill someone for some corn. What a curse too. Now that for the rest of his life, like he's gonna be having corn gifts, and like he'll probably get so sick of corn, develop this like PTSD reaction to it. I already feel that way when I hear the song.
I don't, if I'm being honest, I hate to, I don't want to shit on a 6-year-old's routine, but not my favorite.
100%.
But you wonder if like Noah from the Ellen show, I'm like, just everywhere he go, people are like, apparently, you can't it's hard to depart from your point of entry into the public square.
Yeah, and what I always find really fun is those people who are the memes, the success kid on the beach or the crazy girlfriend with the eyes. You see pictures of what they look like now, and you're like, oh my God, that meme that I've used 6 times, that person's actually now 41 and they have a family in like Kentucky. Right. You're like, what? It's just crazy.
I know. I totally agree. I think we're in a really interesting era of the information age that it empowers normal people, and I think it's so entertaining to dissect it. And I almost think of it as like, when you were growing up and between friend groups or like at sleepovers, you almost had the Miss Mary Mac or concentration, or Miss Susie had a steamboat. You have like hand slapping games. It's like the things that we care about that aren't really culturally like originated anywhere beyond that we all just know and talk about them. And it's almost those like little things of lore, these like inside jokes we can have that we would have inside friend groups that's like democratized to the general public, and we have access to so many pockets of being, and I think it's cool.
Totally. I know. I think a friend of mine, we were once trying to figure out how is it that everyone across the country knew the same hand games. And we were like, it must have happened through summer camp, because then like one kid from one school would spread it to another. And that like must have been the connection. Because otherwise, you know, why were we all afraid of quicksand? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. Why does everybody know the glorious sensation of crack an egg on your head, let the yolk run down?
And feeling the stabbing knife in your back, and you're like,
also
no.
kind of grisly.
Super grisly. Well, today we are going to be talking about a very specific pop culture topic that I am dying to pick your brain on, because I know that you have opinions on Taylor Swift. I have opinions on Taylor Swift. I think everybody does. But something that I really wanted to kind of pick your brain about is this thing that I've been thinking about with Taylor Swift for years. And it's this idea of, is Taylor Swift a victim or is she a badass? And, you know, who knows? This lady is a stranger to basically all of us and everyone's shades of gray. But I find it really interesting that sometimes I have quotes from her speeches and verbiage and lyrics where I feel like half of the time Taylor Swift is presenting herself as someone where it's always been an uphill battle for her, and she's had to struggle and she's had to do all of this stuff and face all of this criticism. But sometimes even in the same speeches, then she'll be saying, and I'm on top, and I was the youngest person to do this, like, and, you know, I did every single thing myself. So I feel like it's confusing as someone hearing these speeches being like, wait, do I feel bad for you, or am I jealous of you, or am I a little bit of both? So before we get into it, first of all, if you had to cast a vote and it had to be very black or white, would you say Taylor Swift victim or badass?
Oh God. Badass.
Yeah.
I think in general I want people to be more defined by their triumphs. But I think she has a great deal of positive contribution. But you said it had to be black or white, so I guess I won't explain further. But I would skew that direction based on her accomplished career and accolades alone.
Yeah, and being, I think, like, maybe I'm biased, but I would say she's #1 pop star in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there's like just a handful of heavy hitters that are really at a level where they can experiment with genre, category. They don't, I mean, Reputation, she was like, yeah, I'm not doing interviews. Like, nobody can do that.
Yes.
That's how you know you're at the top, is you don't have to do a press tour for an album to like hit #1 or whatever.
Yes. So I'm curious about your journey as a Taylor Swift fan. It's interesting how each era kind of brought a different time for people to become a Taylor Swift fan. So like I was in at the beginning, Fearless, Speak Now. That was kind of the time to be rooting for an underdog, right? Like Taylor was new, so exciting. If you came in at the Red era, you were probably really interested in everyone she was dating, you know, Harry, John Mayer, Jake Gyllenhaal. If you came in at the 1989 era, that was a lot of Girl Squad discourse. Reputation was obviously the Kim Kardashian, Kanye cancellation. Lover was like political, queer Taylor Swift, rainbows, and then Evermore and Folklore was she's in the woods, she's a true artist, she's a poet type of era. So when did you become a fan, and have you like felt differently about her through the eras?
I mean, that was quite the syllabus. Should you like have a NYU class about this?
I tried to teach a Taylor Swift class in my college, and I submitted a proposal. It was going to be a 1-credit class, and they didn't let me, but an attempt was made.
You know, academia, I mean, they just gave Taylor Swift a doctorate this year, so they're just a little behind.
I know.
That speech was an example of something I would say is not the most badass, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, I kind of, I mean, I remember like listening to Tim McGraw in the bathtub in my like first college apartment, just being like, holy, like my world was turned upside down by what I couldn't pinpoint then as the very sensory, tangible lyricism of kind of an underdog girl marked by a longing for love. And I think that a lot of us in our youth could relate, and I certainly did. And I mean, yeah, Fearless was the soundtrack to my later college years, and I loved Speak Now, and I loved Red, but I was a casual fan in the way that I loved Top 40 radio. When I think about a fan of somebody, I think the difference is, do you know their non-singles and listen to their album songs, or do you just know like their body of work that has been released as radio singles? And I liked her albums a lot, but I was way more aware of her radio singles, I think, until Red. And that was just a big moment for us all. And that we're, owner proprietor of the Lonely Hearts Club. And so that's when I got, I think, really into the lyricism. When 1989 came around, I was so ready for that pop pivot. I was all in. I wasn't even bothered by the media narratives or squad goals that many people were. I actually say, like, bring Tamerica back full force. I loved getting to see her that much.
That was the hot, like, it was Christmas for me in July.
Yes.
Like, those Instagrams were fantastic.
Has there ever been more of a collective feeling of FOMO for a place you'd never get invited for a person you've never met?
The matching bathing suits, the floaties that were blown up, and it just, like, I think everyone collectively got very excited. And you got to see, like, Blake Lively pregnant, and there was Tom Hiddleston with the I Heart TS.
Oh, God.
Like, it was an event every year.
We'll be talking about that 50 years from now, the I Heart TS tank top. I think I will be. So that era, I think, is when my engagement got next level, because she was so present in the media that I got to know her as a person a little bit better. She started skewing her speech, even though it was still not evolved. She was skewing her speech a smidge more feminist, just to be like, I said I wasn't a feminist before. I didn't know that just meant equality, or pointing out that Ed Sheeran and Bruno Mars aren't targeted for having confessional lyrics about exes, and she was. So I remember being like, oh, I really liked her presence in music and that whole era. But then I found Tumblr, T-Swift, and like Kaler Tumblr in like probably 2016, 2017, and I was never the same. I never knew to look so deeply into what she was doing.
Yeah.
And then once I realized her work is but a treasure map designed to get you to consume more product, I was like, this woman is a genius.
Yes. I still remember buying the physical albums, and even though I had seen lists online, right, of like, here's what the secret messages say, like a little detective, I would be writing it out. And the concept of Easter eggs, everything, it's so fun. And maybe it is this, crazy marketing PR machine, but it does feel really authentic to her.
I think it is authentic to her. Like, I think it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, she has less like party girl energy and more like board game girl energy. And I think a lot of us do too. And she's made consumption of product fun.
Yeah, I remember back when she was on MySpace, there was some blog post that she had written saying that she had just finished a show and everybody was going out partying, but she was like staying on the tour bus to watch the History Channel. And I was like, yeah, that 100% tracks. Like, she is watching the History Channel with her cats. And I don't know. And like you said, there's also been interesting quotes. And once again, I feel like this kind of goes back to victim or badass, where at the beginning of her career, she did kind of allude to, if you're mean to me, I'll write a song about you, or be careful because I'll write a song about you. But then once the media kind of got in on that joke, she was like, okay, stop saying that, like, I'm writing songs about everyone that I date. And I think it's now at a point where if someone was like a newer Taylor Swift fan, they would say, oh my God, the media is horrible for saying that. And of course, the media is just horrible in general. But I do remember in the early days her saying like, oh yeah, well, I'll write a song about that. Or he said not to, but like, I definitely will. And once again, that's kind of leading people in to be like, ooh, like, okay, so she will write a song about someone, but then all of a sudden she doesn't want people to be saying that anymore. And it's like, oh, okay, sorry.
Totally. I think, kind of like we were talking about with the corn kid, like sometimes the thing that makes you take off is the thing you resent the most. And I think that she could not be where she is today if she did not create this element of lore and fact-finding associated with who the songs are about. I think the paternity test sucks as a feminist, but I think as a marketer, it made a lot of sense at the time. And I think she at a really young age wrote checks she can't cash, not understanding the longevity of her being held to that narrative. And over a decade since she's ever said anything alluding to like, all right, you know, in a sassy tone kind of, we're, you know, people in passing still label her as the person who writes songs about guys that dump her. It was happening during the All Too Well re-release. So I think it's an interesting thing where has she been hypocritical? Like 100%. But I think most of us don't have to breathe life into things publicly before we're old enough to know better. And so she did that, it worked, and now hates it because she's successful enough where she doesn't need it.
Yeah. And you know what? She was so young at the beginning. And
so young. The Ellen clip with the Joe Jonas phone call, what was she, like 18?
She might have been 17.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think Fearless came out when she was 16, I think. Or maybe that was her debut when she was 16, and then Fearless was when, I think Speak Now she was 19. But yeah. And anyone, I think of this too, even when people are like these young TikTok stars, they're like, I can't believe Addison Rae or Charli D'Amelio did that. I'm like, if I was their age on TikTok, I would have embarrassed myself, put my foot in my mouth so many times. I find it crazy when people look at a young, I don't know, 20-year-old and they're like, I can't believe she said this. I wouldn't. I'm like, no, God. You would have. We all would have. Taylor did. She's always been very well media trained because I think she's incredibly smart.
Oh, totally. When I think most millennials, we didn't know about the immortality of what we put online. So we were almost like the most authentic in a way because we didn't know to be more curated. So like the way I just would describe myself at 16 sure as hell wouldn't be socially conscious. I was just like shopping at the Charlotte Russe. Like I wasn't doing anything deep or important. And the fact that she even was that polished from an early age, I think is impressive. But I totally agree with you. I think maybe kids have more access to information about other people's lives in a way that allows them to be more aware and empathetic than perhaps we were when we were a bit more disconnected. So we were so insular to our lives. But she was always pretty calculated. And I think I mean that in a good way. Defending her is a full-time job because like all of the things people say about her like make sense and have roots. But she's kind of a unique situation where people like don't let her move on.
Yeah, and also even the worst thing that Taylor Swift ever did, if I were to critique her for it, I would also still throw myself down the stairs for her in a heartbeat because I just think she's so massively important. And I don't know, there is something about Taylor Swift. I'm trying to think of other artists who have had this much discourse and strong opinions about them. You know, like Katy Perry is basically just a pop star, you know?
Yeah.
Selena Gomez is basically just a pop star. And maybe that's because you don't think of these people as actually writing their lyrics. So you're not going to read super much into a song that has like 15 LA co-writers on it. But there really isn't, maybe Olivia Rodrigo, because people are calling her the next Taylor Swift, but I can't even think of like a second place person.
Okay, that's interesting you say that because my theory on this, I don't know if this is the best example, to a much different degree, is like, well, okay, you know when people go out of their way to position their brand as almost having a predisposed, broken down parasocial barrier, and they really make you believe they're your best friend. Mm-hmm. I think she went with relatable best friend just like you. Even when America was in not like other girls phase, she was like, no, I'm exactly like other girls. I like cats and flowers and drinking tea. And that was even before it was cool to be yourself. So I think she like cultivated this audience of like people that are very like, you know, I think she cultivated an audience of like probably a lot of young white women that didn't feel like the cool party girls or didn't feel like they could fit in a box and were a little bit awkward before they found their place in the world. And she represented them and they followed her throughout life. And she has this like army of people that genuinely feel like she writes for them, to them. They look out for her. And I think that like when you set the bar that high and you convince people that they know you that well, even though they actually don't, the standards are really high. Mm. That's part of it to me. I don't know why the general public and media, other than like generic misogyny and just being like annoyed with girlishness, like I don't know what their deal is. They've always kind of had it out for her. But I think that sometimes the people that go hardest against you were once your like biggest fans and they turned at a point. And I think some of that happened to Taylor Swift a bit, or has happened over the years, where they've felt like, you know, jilted from secret sessions, or she didn't speak out on the issues she said she would, or you know what I mean? I can't decide if like there's something fundamentally interesting about her, or if people were misguided about how like close they were to her.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is too. Because, I mean, for as much, there are people who love her, there are people who hate her. But I do also meet a good number of people where they're like, I like Shake It Off. And that's all I have to say on the matter? So,
Yes.
but when you're online, right, especially with like the For You page and everything, you're really only interacting with people who love Taylor Swift or like hate her with like a bloodthirsty passion. And I don't
Yes.
know, it's a creepy amount of people.
Actually, I would say that I think that turning point, I think that if you followed Taylor Swift before the 1989 media blitz, you like understood her and could contextualize what she was doing. If you were introduced to her during that time, or the volume of seeing her was higher, I think those are the people that were really off put by the squad goals of it all. And just like she said in a later interview, like that part of my life, it was kind of filling the empty lunch tables of my past. Like, look how many friends I have. I think there were a lot of people that took it just like that and knew a lot of people like Taylor Swift that kind of traded on a currency of exclusivity, and it was off-putting. So I can actually see that too as being a turning point for some people.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that too. And I find it interesting too that people's number one, if you're walking by someone on the street and they only know a few songs of hers, the number one thing that they will say, which it isn't a thought that they have on their own, they've just read it or seen it on Twitter, is always like, she's always writing songs about those boys, or like she can't keep a man, or isn't it so egotistical of her to be writing all of these songs about her life? And I'm always baffled by that one, because I'm like, so you'd rather someone sing lyrics that they bought from someone else? Like, that's
Right.
always the most baffling to me. And that's a piece of criticism where I'm like, has Ed Sheeran like ever gotten that once in his life? I don't think so.
Oh, 100%. Like, I mean, think about country stars with private planes talking about the little red dirt road in their pickup truck. It's like, that's not about their life anymore. They're full on pandering. At least she's evolving her lyrics with her life.
Yeah.
But that narrative's tough too, because I think we're like at risk of making the world an artless place if we make people feel like their experiences are invalid because they could be worse, better, different, look like this, that, or the other. It's a weird whataboutist thing the internet does, where they want you to feel as insignificant as possible, and you creating art based off of your experience to feel as narcissistic as possible. But since the dawn of time, all anybody knows is their own experience, and that's usually what they create art from.
I think that all the time. Also, like, I want love songs. That's what I want. I want love songs. I want breakup songs. Maybe you could throw in a few like friendship or like empower anthems in there, but I don't want Taylor Swift to sing, oh my God, the Wi-Fi router went out and, like, I have to put it in the dryer a second time because the duvet sheet is just too heavy. It's like, I'm sure those things do happen to her, but let's be honest, you don't want her singing about that stuff. We want love and drama all the time.
Right. Like a sad country anthem about how as an adult it's hard to like find a hobby and your postmate left your food in the lobby. Yes. Like no one wants to hear that tune.
A little rhyming there too, though. It's already sounding good.
Those are the two things I've been thinking about a lot.
So something that did, obviously she's had moments up and down with the public. I think the most recent thing that had people upset, well, probably the most recent would be private jets. But I think there was a large amount of people frustrated with her when she didn't speak out about Roe v. Wade. And I think it was especially frustrating because after her documentary, Miss Americana, she kind of positioned herself as this political advocate. And it was something that took her like a decade to do. And I mean, I really have to scratch my head over the timeline, but I feel like her time as a political advocate kind of ended right when the album era ended as well. Or at the very least, like in the last 2 years, maybe when a big thing happens, she'll tweet about it. But if you're going to deem yourself a political advocate and make an entire documentary about how you are now an activist, I would assume baseline low level, if you're going to call yourself an activist, at least one tweet a month would probably be the minimum. And like we have not been seeing that. So I'm curious what you think. Was this just to promote her album? Do you think that she got backlash from it and that's why she stopped? Or my little theory, that representative in Nashville that she wanted to vote out of office, like stayed in office. There wasn't enough votes to kick her out. So maybe she was embarrassed and stopped. I'm just so curious, like, why she hasn't been politically active in the last like 2 years, save for maybe like 5 tweets over 2 years.
I know, I'm with you. And this is one of those things that, like, I feel like on the podcast, I'm usually trying to come from a place of, I've thought this through and have found resolve, and this is how I feel. But as a fan, this is something I can't find resolve with myself, because I was sitting in bed watching the most seismic thing to happen to reproductive rights in decades, and then she did a merch drop, and I clicked on it, and she was selling "fuck the patriarchy" keychains as we were getting fucked by the patriarchy. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And I had to like take a month off. I was like, I can't even. That was a moment for me that many people probably got to a lot earlier than I did, where I felt like I was starting to see it for what it was. And I think that the era of activism, like, yeah, so Miss Americana was January 2020. I went back in her Twitter to be like, what has she talked about? Because I'm not trying to keep score, but I just wanted to know if it was like it ever seemed sustainable.
Yeah. And
she was super vocal in like June 2020. Remember, she like tweeted Trump about stoking the fires of white supremacy. Like, she was like in it and up until through summer 2020. And then it totally dropped. Is that what you mean by the album cycle?
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think that tweet is her most liked tweet of all time, the stoking the fires.
Oh, really?
Because I remember, stoking them, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was fires, flames, or something. It was punchy, and I was like, yes. Mm-hmm. And I think it set a precedent for us thinking, like, cool, we can, you know, it feels better to get behind and support and defend and spend so much of, like, in your job and my job, spend so much of our real estate covering her, when it's a person who's supporting things that actually are, you know, defending people's rights and making the lives of your audience better. And it is, I am genuinely struggling with the Roe situation. I think the part that's hardest too is, you know, major things have happened over the course of the past year, but she popped on to defend herself against Ginny in Georgia when they told a joke about her, and also defended herself with that songwriter, something with like Billie Eilish, and that, I forget what it was.
His name, like Aaron or something?
I don't remember. Oh, he's the head, like the lead singer of Gorillaz.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, that's kind of the only time she got involved. And then 3 weeks after, no, maybe like a month after the decision leaked, she like retweeted something from Michelle Obama about Roe, and that was it. But then
it's always an Obama too. I remember there was another tweet that she made, and she reposted something of Barack Obama's, which, you know, the repost is always good, but I always wonder, like, what are your actual thoughts on this? But I guess, I don't know, she says like a sentence on it, which, once again, it's like, you said you were a political activist, and like the most we're getting from you is a retweet with like, there's only so many characters. It's not even 2 tweets. It's like 1 sentence on the statement, which isn't being an activist. That's your PR statement.
Completely agree. And I think that I mean, if I'm being honest, I also struggle with the David O. Russell film. I also struggle with Crawdads. Like, I think a lot of these decisions are adjacent to people that don't represent the things she kind of promised she wouldn't be a part of, and I just don't really get it.
I think also, too, being a fan, right? I remember online, all of the forums and everything, when Taylor Swift wasn't doing or saying anything about Roe v. Wade, I remember we started getting worried. There were people who were like, what if something's going on with her mom? Like, she's been really quiet. Oh, yeah. She hasn't done this. What if something devastating is happening? And then for the merch drop to happen after that, it was like, okay, we just like felt bad because we thought maybe her mom was dying. And now it's like, nope, buy this pool floaty for like $80, you know? It's purple.
Right. It was a Claire's explosion of purple glitter. Yeah, it's a hard thing because I hear this all day from people that are people want to defend Taylor Swift so intensely, and I've fallen in that category too. And I, in many cases, will, but I do think it's important to not worship public figures and to be able to say they don't do everything perfectly, and to express your disdain. But it doesn't mean I hate her, don't love her music, won't like buy every piece of weird merch to get that Ticketmaster thing so I can be a little closer in line for a ticket I'll never even get. Like, I'll do all the things. I'm still here, but I think it's okay to let her be human. And with that comes the grace to explain herself if there's a good reason, and also the importance of saying when I think she's misstepped. And I agree with you that I wouldn't have overthought it. If she was radio silent, I get that there's sometimes that serves a purpose, and maybe she was going to talk at midterms. Maybe she was waiting, it was a leak, and maybe she was waiting till it was final, but then nothing still came. I was willing to give benefits of the doubt, but it felt like such a miss in reading the room and doing the right thing to drop merch that something about that sent me. And and then like, yeah, and she did a graduation speech, and it was mostly just, I don't know, it wasn't really anything about anything.
Yeah, and I think what really made the whole Roe v. Wade situation like triply awful was that Taylor Swift, throughout her career, she has this tendency of having a thin skin or getting a little bit defensive, which, you know, it sounds like I'm insulting her, but I mean, I am also 2 for 2 on both of those, so it's not that bad.
Oh,
but
yeah, tissue paper over
yes.
here. I get it.
And but a lot of these moments happen, and she references women. So, you know, the Amy Poehler Tina Fey joke at the Golden Globes when they said, you know what, Taylor Swift, you stay away from Michael J. Fox's son, or go for it. She needs some time to learn about herself. She said, you know, the iconic quote,
yes,
there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And then in 2015, when Nicki Minaj was tweeting her frustrations about nominations at the MTV Music Video Awards, and by the way, Nicki Minaj was tweeting about issues of racism with the music awards and things like that, basically saying if I was like a different type of artist, you would have given me this, but instead you're celebrating like women with very slim bodies and blah, blah, blah. But we had all of these views. We did the choreo. You couldn't go on social media without people seeing the cover art and outfits for Halloween, which, yeah, Anaconda should have got. Like, that's what everyone was talking about that year. And Taylor took that tweet and goes, I've done nothing but love and support you. It's unlike you to pit women against each other. Maybe one of the men took your slot. So many different instances, even with Ginny and Georgia.
I forgot about that. That's bad.
Well, isn't that horrible? And it's all of these things where something happens and Taylor Swift goes, don't say that because I am a woman and women are supposed to help other women. And then obviously Roe v. Wade, you know, women and, you know, those who can give birth, you know, I would say probably majority women, but anyone who it relates to. And that's very much a women supporting other women or, you know, people, and silent. And it's just like, but there have been so many different moments where you've been like, I want to support these issues and like, how dare you not help other people? And I really can't think of, you know, a political situation of the last 10 years that's more tied to this whole idea of like women helping other women and like support other women and things like that. And it's just like silence. And it's like, okay, well, when it's you, it matters. But when it's women on a whole, doesn't matter as much.
Right. I mean, if that isn't the crux of mid-2010s, like MLM white feminism, I don't know what is. It's like an incessant need to center yourself and only care about issues when they threaten your capitalistic gain. And you hope people evolve from that, and it seemed like in Miss Americana she did. Like, I even dug through and found an old like magazine interview where she like confirmed I was like, is there any chance that she is like anti-choice? But found like she said one time like she's pro-choice or whatever. Like, so that's what's hard for me is like, I know it's not. So when people I complain about it on my podcast and her fans are like, she does like, so we don't need to like hold celebrities responsible for caring about everything ever, or you just care because it's an issue you specifically care about and blah, 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 which fine. But I do think that there's an element of like, if we know that she is pro-choice and she said she was going to be an activist and she went out, she like so obviously said nothing and dropped merch during the biggest effing deal. Like, it almost makes so little sense. I am wondering, if something happens on midnights, like, okay, but it better be clear and it better be before midterms, because that's the only thing that would absolve it for me. But like, otherwise, it seems like there has to be something else to the story because it just makes so little sense to me, I guess.
It does. And also when people are like, normally I agree, right? I don't think all celebrities should be political activists. In fact, I'm kind of not a fan when they are, because I feel like so often they miss the mark, they're condescending, and they're hypocritical. They're talking about the environment and then getting on their private plane, right? They're saying this needs to happen, but they're spending like excessive water usage on, you know, it's just one of those things where like, if you are a celebrity, you can't really tell other people how to live because there's no way that you are living the right way yourself. Like we saw that with Taylor Swift taking her private plane, you know, everywhere and back. But if you make a documentary, and it's your coming out story of being a political activist, then people do get to hold you to that standard. You just made them watch an hour and a half video on it, and you got paid to promote that message. You know Netflix was paying her big bucks. So whenever people are like, oh my God, you shouldn't expect this of her, she told me to expect it 2 years ago. So is she, until she puts out another documentary that says I'm no longer a political activist, you should still be able to ask that of her. That's what I think.
Right. And it kind of was a thing that absolved her of never speaking out in like 2016 when it really mattered, you know? And so
it was more of like a Band-Aid, if anything. Yeah.
And I know it's tricky because like I operate from like a commentary and entertainment medium. So do you. Like my content's largely escapist, but it's just not that hard to acknowledge that you care about the lives, well-being, and basic rights of the people that write your checks. And she came out in a big way with like, you need to calm down and stuff, and like, which was cool, but like didn't show up this past year like when Don't Say Gay was like top of mind in the public square, you know? Like, so I really can't, I don't know if she realized that it was, she wouldn't feasibly be able to keep up with things in a way that would ever make people happy, so she dipped out again. But I don't know. And I can't understand what it's like to be on that level. I certainly don't address every issue ever, and try to stay in my lane. But to your point, I also know the things that are like the most important to the people that support me, and I want them to feel supported. And I think in that moment, as a diehard fan who defends her a lot, who has been in a situation that would have literally been killed by these types of laws in place when I had an ectopic pregnancy, like I think that I was doing the Taylor Swift thing of feeling so personally offended in that moment that I just like couldn't even. And I admit that there's an element of that that's like unique to my experience, but yeah, it's hard to navigate. And I'm interested to see if Midnight's has an element of activism or women's empowerment, and that's a little bit more, I don't know, pointed or intersectional or something. She was wearing a necklace the other day that was called like a woman power necklace. Did you see that? I wonder if it was an Easter egg.
No, but like, why is that making me roll my eyes so hard? It's just like, it's been 2 years, and like the time I'll talk about promoting and empowering women, it's for an Easter egg for my upcoming album. And it's just like, well, there's been like 2 years. Like, I just go back to thinking like, when people are like, she needs to do something. And then it's one tweet with maybe 2 to 3 sentences in it. And it's like, once again, that's like a PR statement. That's not being an activist, which, you know, I don't know, maybe to this day she's like, I wish I never did that documentary, because like I do not want to get involved in this world. But I think you bring up an interesting point when you were saying people pleasing. So one of the things that I'm fascinated by is Taylor Swift's Woman of the Decade speech that she did at Billboard. Did you watch that speech?
Is she wearing a navy jumpsuit with a gold chain?
Yes, and
okay.
Jamila, she gave her it, and then like awkwardly stood there for like the 10 minutes
that's right.
she was talking. So, you know, a lot of people had different opinions on the speech. I found myself really uncomfortable by it, which I think I'll break down different parts of it, but to me it just felt so north and south. So what I think is interesting, and I get very like armchair psychologist about all of this stuff, which I know I shouldn't, but it's so hard not to. She starts the speech by saying, I'm Taylor. And she does this at her tours and her concerts. And I feel like it was such a cute thing to do at the beginning, because like there were some people there who didn't know her. But I did wonder, how long is she going to keep doing, hi, I'm Taylor? Everyone knows who you are. You're the woman. They are honoring you at that event. Your name's everywhere. Like, why do you think she always introduces herself, I'm Taylor?
See, that's funny you mention that, because I actually find that charming. It's almost like part of canon, like that she's stuck to. And whenever she says it at a concert, it's like, bitch, I know. I just spent $1,000 on a ticket in the snake pit so I could be on an aisle just to catch a sight of your dad, who's an old stockbroker, because I want one of your old guitar picks. Like, I know who you are.
I just bought popcorn. That's $27. I know that you're Taylor.
Yes, but that's kind of the joke, right? It's like, I don't know. So I actually see that as part of like canon, like 1, 2, 3, let's go, bitch, at this point.
Yes.
And I think it's funny, but I've never heard her do it in the context of a speech or to accept an award, I don't think. At least Not that I noticed.
Yeah, well, who knows? I'm sure she doesn't do it for every speech, but, this is one that happens. And in the speech, she's talking about kind of her experience and her career and what's happened. But there's a lot of paragraphs where she talks about a low and then a high, and they go back to back. So there was one where she says, I saw pop stations send my songs Love Story and You Belong With Me to #1 for the first time. And I saw that as a female in this industry, some people will always have slight reservations about you. Whether you deserve to be there, whether your male producer or co-writer is the reason for your success, or whether it was a savvy record label. It wasn't. And that's something where, I don't know, just on a level, I feel a little bit weird because I'm like, oh my God, wow, like you're young and you're getting success. Oh, people had reservations about you, where it's like, you're having also, it wasn't a male producer or a co-writer the reason for her success, but it did help. Nobody makes it in this world alone. And I find that interesting too. I feel like Taylor is either half of the time saying, it was so hard to do this, but I did it alone. And I'm like, the answer's probably in the middle where like there were hard moments, but I had people help and, blah, blah, blah. And together we all did this. And I feel like that message in the middle is more empowering. But when I hear Taylor talk about her life, it's either, oh my God, it was so hard. And that makes me feel discouraged because I'm like, if it was so hard for Taylor Swift, I'll never be able to do anything. Or the message is, at age 16, I won a Grammy and radio shows were like playing Love Story everywhere. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that sounds good, but that also sounds too easy. And I feel like when she talks about her career, it's just the lowest lows and the highest highs and none of the middle.
That's an interesting thing I've never thought about. I think that when you're talking about your career or telling a story about your life or anything that was difficult, maybe not in the grand scheme of things, but difficult for you, it's hard to balance the tension of what it felt like in real time before you knew you'd make it. And I think she's so famous and so popular and so well received and like has everything you could ever want. It's almost hard to believe that those granular moments existed or were even that impactful. And even to think of a point where Taylor Swift would ever feel like those things were holding her back. I think when she highlights those things, it's more so to illustrate the real-time struggle of navigating that world before you know its positive outcome.
Yeah,
but
like
we know
I'm
it's positive
human
outcome,
too,
so
yeah.
we're like, you're fine.
Interesting. Yes, and I think that's what it is, right? Because so she's getting this award, Woman of the Decade, right? Obviously a very high position. Where is it? So there's a quote here. She goes, "When Fearless did win Album of the Year at the Grammys, and I did become the youngest solo artist ever to win the award. And with that win came criticism and backlash that I'd never experienced before as a young new artist." And that's also a sentence that makes me feel weird because criticism and backlash, everyone gets that. I mean, just as a podcaster, you and I get that all the time, I'm sure. But you know what everyone doesn't get? Grammys, And it's this story of like, Fearless won Album of the Year at the Grammys. I was the youngest solo artist ever to win the award, but I got criticism and backlash. And it's like, dude, so does everyone. So do retail workers on the daily,
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where we all go through the same struggles, but we're not receiving the same highs that you get. And I almost wonder if Taylor is talking about this to kind of once again feed that idea of relatability. But once you're at the top, it's kind of annoying to be relatable because we're not relatable anymore. Maybe our emotions and our feelings are, but right now you're talking about criticism and backlash, and you took a private jet to this event where everyone's honoring you for being the Woman of the Decade. And I'm not saying that to be like, oh, if you're rich, you can't have problems. But I just find it funny that Taylor Swift talks about her problems so much.
That's an interesting point that I could see going either way. I think that it's really hard to discern between the two because when you sense that there's an effort of curated authenticity, it's especially grating because that's not the point, right? Like to plan your relatability, to plan your authenticity, it's just like, no, that's not what we're here for. However, a woman in her position who has the eyes and ears of so many young girls, which is also another reason why we're so frustrated with her for not talking about things like the overturning of Roe v. Wade, also has the opportunity to be like, listen, nothing good comes without its downsides. the road to getting here wasn't pleasant. It was often at the expense of my personal comfort and being offended and feeling misunderstood and blah, blah, blah. And at least since I'm kind of a sensitive bird, I think as you grow up, you realize you move through the world really feeling validated by things like grades or sports or being good at these things that have these external metrics that you think will fulfill you. And then you realize they're kind of meaningless. And what matters is like the day to day of how you move through the world. And like, she has every accolade in the world. She has a plane, she has money, and I agree, she's marked with more privilege than perhaps anybody. But I think she's still like a sensitive person who really feels the negativity, the criticism, the being misunderstood at every turn. And there's maybe an element that's self-serving and being like, and I did it anyway. So I think that it could be a little bit of both, like filling the empty lunch tables of her past and like kind of a middle finger to everybody who said she couldn't do it. That's more self-serving. But I also think there's an element too of, I remember hearing that speech and she said something, and I wish I could remember what it was. It was something about criticism or something about like, anytime you put yourself out there, people are going to have a lot to say about it. But that doesn't mean you don't create. That doesn't mean you don't push forward. And as a person who's like career at this point is like from scratch of just output, I'm so self-conscious of everything I'm doing. It was almost refreshing to hear that if that's your nature, you're going to feel that way no matter if you're at the top or where you are now.
Yeah, so it's something where it's not like her message isn't it gets better, but it's like it stays
that's part
the
of
same,
it.
but we're all in this together.
Yes, that's how I took it, was like, yeah, it does suck how with everything you put out that you think is really great quality work, like somebody is so locked and loaded ready to shit on it. But maybe that is part of it, because she couldn't be more successful to me, but literally everybody shits on everything she does. I don't feel bad for her, like personally in a sense, but I kind of thought she was making a point.
Yeah, well, also her sensitivity is the reason why she does such great songwriting. I don't know.
Exactly.
Are you familiar with the enneagram test at all?
Mm-hmm.
I go back and forth. I'm like, would Taylor Swift be a 3 or a 4? Because I feel like a 3, she's so achievement oriented and goal oriented. She loves those awards. They mean a lot to her. But then I also feel like 4, she is very like individualistic, like my experience, a little bit of drama, or takes criticism to heart. Have you ever tried to type her?
Well, you know, as a 4, that was tough for me to hear.
Oh, I'm a 4 too.
I know. Most people in this type of job would be. Like, you and I think our opinions are so interesting, we put a mic in front of ourselves. Like, that's we're not well. But I think she's a 3-wing 4. And that's hilarious because I have thought about this a lot.
Me too. Because sometimes I'll listen to her songs and I'm like, she's just like me, you know?
Yeah. Are you a 3-wing? Well, I'm a 4-wing 3.
No, I'm the other one. I forget what it is.
4-wing 5, which means you're like individualistic and independent and analytic.
Oh, no, maybe not. Oh, I'll have to check out the wings, but it was the type of thing where I read the description of a 4 and they're like, you're overly dramatic and depressed and like you feed your emotions too much. I was like, yeah, shut up.
Oh, the care and feeding of my emotions is like my memoir title. I feel like this is why I think this conversation is really interesting and dynamic when we talk about the experience versus perspective almost, right? Like 4s are so in their own world in a way that would appear narcissistic, but is more so like deeply emotional, layered, has to like process and express themselves to even like get through those emotions, to be through the fog enough to have the clarity to see the silver linings. And I relate to being like so deep in my experience and my own sorrow and having this undercurrent of melancholia to the point where I'm not always thinking about the right things. I'm not always doing the right thing. I'm not always seeing other people. And that's a level of self-awareness I've had to like try to find with age. But that about her is very 4-ish. You know, we're all like, don't put women in boxes, but let's put ourselves in tons of boxes. The enneagram.
Obsessed. I'm like a cat. I feel comfortable in a box. And like sometimes I wish that there was some sort of app where I could say like, these are my big 3 for horoscope. This is my enneagram. This is my Myers-Briggs. This is my, I don't know, there must be other ones too. And then I could find other people just like me. And we would either be the best of friends or the worst of enemies, because I think sometimes you need balance. But those quizzes are like addicting to people. And how fun is it to take like celebrities and fictional characters and be like, oh my God, they think in just the same way that I do.
That is a brilliant business idea.
Yeah.
That I think you should pursue, because it would be fun to be like, oh, you also self-identify as, you know, a Stacy with a Claudia Rising and a Dawn Moon, or like whatever.
I loved Dawn. Yes. Yeah.
Dawn wore like earth earrings. She was an environmentalist. She had breezy Blake Lively. She was Larissa Olenek from The Secret World of Alex Mack in the movie, who I loved in the 90s.
I loved Claudia too, like, you know, like her obsession with the junk food and hiding it everywhere. It's like, yeah, relatable.
That's me. You're so right. And I think it speaks to meme culture too. It's like, all we want in this life and in these times is to come across something and think, that's so me. I feel understood.
Yes, there's nothing better than, I've been getting a lot of TikTok tarot card readings of people being like, just like the saddest like tarot card reading ever, and then you enter the comments and everyone's like, I claim this and I need it, and I'm like, okay, so like me and 70 people are all going through it right now, but it makes you feel better to like seek camaraderie in like some inexplicable way.
I saw you got a video that was like, you're like, the key is you don't respond to the tarot card lives or astrology lives that have like
more than 10,000 likes.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't have the K by it, you're like, this is meant for me.
Yes, some amalgam of the universe and the algorithm found you.
When really it's just they're literally trawling through your phone because you gave them access to everything, and they're reading your text messages and like serving you videos that relate. Whoops.
It's scary to the point where, before I understood how refined the TikTok algorithm is on Instagram or my podcast, I was like, is anybody else getting a lot of this highly niche content? And I had to be like, I need to not tell people that because I'm engaging with that content.
Well, I made one video, I remember it was like a year and a half ago at my sister's place, and I was like, well, like, something's happening. I'm like, everyone has an eating disorder. Everyone's talking about it. And I got a bunch of comments. They were like, no, none of that content's come across my page.
Haven't seen any of it.
And I was like, oh my God, I need to delete this. I was like, I just completely gave myself away. I'm like, what's happening in the zeitgeist? And they were like, girl, it's not the zeitgeist. It's your For You page. And I was like, oh, okay. That's a good reminder.
That is... I think we all have to learn the hard way, honestly. Like,
yes, there's one moment where you're like, oh yeah, so like we all love like XYZ character, and they're like, never seen that character in my life.
Yes, exactly. And I think it is kind of, I never know if to be spooked or impressed by the precision of the FYP. I feel like mine understands me because you come up on mine a lot. I think algorithms are hard because I consume as much content that I don't like. Like, if somebody comes up that's, you know, like Maddie Pruitt preaching.
Only God can satisfy.
Like, I did an episode called Preaching to the Friar about these, like, reality star turned televangelists like Maddie Pruitt, like Sadie Robertson from Duck Dynasty. And I'm fascinated by them, and I consume so much of their content that I'm now on, like, evangelical talk, and everyone has, like, Kingdom Chaser in their bio. And I'm like, I'm not meant to be here.
I get, because I think it's so cringe when guys are like, alpha males do this and like sigma males do this, and I will get TikToks that are like, here's why semen retention is important, and I'm like, why am I getting this? And then I'm like, oh no, it's because I interact with all of this stuff because I find it so sick and like fascinating.
I don't want to be on creatine talk. How did I get here?
Miserable. Okay, last few things I have for Taylor Swift here. This was an interesting thing. I think Taylor Swift has said before that she doesn't have a therapist. I feel like most celebrities probably do. I feel like Ariana Grande has talked about going to therapy. I feel like if you're someone as big as Taylor Swift, you'd probably be terrified to have a therapist. But what I thought was really interesting in this speech was she was talking about how to go back and appease her critics. And I'm also curious on your take of how to deal with critics. So she said, I decided that I would be the only songwriter on my third album, Speak Now, and that I would tour constantly, work on my vocals every day, and perfect my stamina in a live show. I decided that I would be what they said I couldn't be. I didn't know that then, soon enough, people would decide on something else I wasn't quite doing right, and the circle would keep going on and rolling along, and I would keep accommodating, overcorrecting in an effort to appease my critics. So she talks about how, you know, They say she can't sing, she gets vocal training. They say she's too country, she goes pop. They say that she doesn't have any girlfriends, she gets the girl squad. And I wonder why, in going through that cycle, there's never a moment where she goes, I decided, fuck them. I'm just going to be me. But instead it was like, I need to prove them wrong, or I need to please them, or I need to correct this. And I think that was something for me, especially with this podcast. I remember the first couple of times I got bad feedback, I'm like, they're 100% right. They probably are an executive at Wondery, and I need to change everything. And finally, you know, you get to a point where you're like, well, I'm just going to do what I like, and if it is what it is, then it is what it is. Do you think that people-pleasing or appeasing the critics is a way to make you feel better about yourself? Do you think that it's a trap that some people get into and they can't get out of?
I think it's a personality-driven thing. I think that my read on that Billboard speech, that context is helpful for me because I think that's what stuck out to me. At a point, the thing that I had to say fuck it to wasn't the critics. What I had to be like, fuck it to me ever thinking I'll be a person that doesn't care what other people think about me, my art, my work, anything. There's almost an ownership of being like, I'm sensitive, I care, this will never not bother me, and I'm not better than moving through the world as a product of the opinions about me. You hope self-confidence and work experience gets you to a place where you're less rattled, and it certainly does. It makes your skin thicker in a sense, but I think that I personally have a threshold of like, I am never going to be a zero fucks kind of gal. I give all the fucks, always have, always will. And like, can that be okay?
Yeah.
And then, so my experience being more public facing has been not saying you can't talk bad about me or doing everything people say I can't do, rather modifying my consumption of it.
Yeah.
And I think that she had a response that's kind of a marker of immaturity where you're not like, you haven't decided like, I'm sensitive, it is what it is, or you haven't decided that you are a fuck it type of person. So she took that feedback as actionable direction in her career, which is just such an unhealthy thing to do. And I would be surprised if she doesn't still do that a little bit. But that's kind of what I took from that, was like, I wanted to kind of flip them the bird, but also I was listening to them way more than the people that liked me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the way that she talks about these different kind of eras and albums she's had, where I'm like, ooh, this is the sparkly album, and then this is the one where she wears striped shirts and red pants. But when she talked about it in terms of who she was trying to please at that time, right? So like, me doing all of my songs on Speak Now, that was because they said I had co-writers. And me doing all of this on Red, like, that was because they said that I couldn't do rock and I wanted to do better lyrics. And I'm like, oh my God, has her entire trajectory been, you know, especially when you work for yourself, you have to sit down and be like, okay, what's my goal for the next year? And I'm like, is her goal music related, art related, creativity related, or is it like, they said they didn't like this about me in 2021, so in 2022 we are going to take care of that, you know? I just wonder, like, how does she set goals, and how much do like the critics kind of influence what she's working on for the next year?
I know, it's an interesting point, because it's like, yeah, you would hope something like the feedback of her not speaking out on Roe would be like the type of criticism that maybe she'd take to heart and listen to.
2023, she's like, woo, I'm sending the pill to everybody.
So part of me does not know if she like literally sees nothing, or I don't know. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, that I don't know, but like, I guess since I'm roughly her age, to me, it's like the evolution of personhood, where if her art was about her life and her life was marked by an onslaught of criticism your average person isn't well adjusted for in their teens and 20s. The feedback loop of fame is not something anybody is well adjusted for. I think that maybe it started that way and she didn't realize that until hindsight. Like, maybe, you know, sometimes you do stuff and you don't even realize why you're doing it. And then you look back and you're like, that was so transparent. Like,
and I have noticed Taylor, both for the good and the bad, she does seem to have a if this, then that mentality, right? So like, if they say I have too many co-writers, then I will write a thing on my own. You even saw this when she announced the album. You know, if you guys gave me this award, then I would do this album. Or even on Tumblr, right? Like, if they start, I think one of her likes that she had liked was like, you know, change to be BLM. If you do this, then I'll never use Tumblr again. Like, if you guys go too crazy about my relationships, then you'll never see a picture of me and Joe together. So I feel like for so many different aspects, she is kind of like, if this, then that. And that kind of happens for the secret sessions too. If you're the best fan ever, then you could get invited to secret sessions. So there is kind of a little bit of punishment reward situation. And I think she does it internally to herself too.
That is such a good point. And I'm glad you bring that up, because that is actually one of the things that frustrates me about her, is that the human in me understands what it must be like to receive that kind of criticism. The fan in me, and this is why I've tried, like, I really think about this a lot, when anybody that's public facing spends more time discussing criticism than public favor, is that the interviews and times that Taylor Swift is always talking about her critics, it feels offensive as a person that's like unequivocally supported her, that they're getting all of the airtime. And when Reputation came out, and people like me always understood her, always stood by her, never were off put by the Kanye tapes. And she's like, yeah, so because you all were so rude to me, like sent snake emojis to my Twitter, I'm not doing press. And it's like, well, now the biggest consumers and supporters of your art are robbed of the context they'd get from a media tour. I get the element of shtick, but I also think that there's something that really slights your biggest fans when you let the negativity be louder. And she does have a problem of hyper focusing on critics.
Yeah, and I think of that too, even as a podcaster, like, when you do get criticism, it's so hard not to like spiral over it. And I've listened to some friends, you know, podcasts. I also call some of them friends, and they do not know me. I just think that they are. And they'll be like, this happened, or like, we got this review, or like, you know, didn't like this. And I understand why they say it, but I'm always like, oh, well, like they're getting the airtime. What about the people who left the 5-star reviews or things like that? And it would be perfectly reasonable for me to get on every podcast and be like, look, some people gave me a 1-star review. I do this along with my 9-to-5 job and 2 episodes a week, and I'm completely burnt out, and this is all I can do. So I got one fact wrong, but the other 865 were correct, and nobody thanked me for that. And it's like, oh my God, someone's probably trying to listen to this on their morning walk or their commute to work, and I'm just like bitching in their ear. And also, you know, it's kind of funny because, like you said with Reputation, she did an entire album that was about like the critics, you know? When will we get an entire album about all of the fans, you know? Like, when will all of this love be like, this inspired my album, you know? I don't think it ever would.
Well, right. And that's why fans, especially people that plan to give birth someday, are like, this is the time when we could maybe get some reciprocated support. Yes. But you're absolutely right. And I think that at a point, it gets a little exhausting and distracting because you're talking to a bunch of people that aren't there anymore. When you're talking to your harshest critics, they've dropped off. They're not listening. They're not watching. You're wasting your valuable time talking to people that already left you. There is, as much as I'll never be zero fucks, I also acknowledge the natural progression of attracting and repelling as you move through your career. Like, it just is what it is. And I think if you appeal to everyone, you'll appeal to no one. Like, that part's fine. It's inevitable. But yeah, she does focus a bit too much. And it sounded to me like the solution post-rep wasn't to care less, to seek therapy, to reframe. It was to never look at anything ever and have it filtered through her team. And I still think to this day she does that.
Yeah. And God, that's such a poignant point that you made on the critics aren't there anymore, right? So her being like, I'm not doing any interviews for Reputation. Do you think that there were critics out there who were like, damn it, no, I wanted that interview? Like, no, if anything, It made them happy and it made us sad.
They were like tweeting, being like, I can't believe she, you know, is using the melody from I'm Too Sexy. They were like bitching about something else. Yes. You know, they don't. So yeah, I think it's a very, back to our conversation about experience versus maintaining perspective, it is absolutely valid that your experience would be to like work your ass off, you know, do 2 episodes a week, also work another job, be so burnt out and doing it anyway for the people that love you, and to have a person that doesn't completely derail and de-energize you. Like, that is fair, that is normal, that is valid. But yeah, you have to be a little strategic in how you share those sentiments to not make other people feel underappreciated. And 100%. I feel that all the time, every day, all day.
Yeah, that's when the journal gets like a real freaking entry from me. And then you turn on the mic, hello, we're going to have fun for the next hour. Damn it.
It's hard to transcend your experience. And I think like songwriting is kind of nice because you have kind of a layer or filter where you can express the dimensions and extremes of your life without people calling you like petty or lacking perspective or whiny or like whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I do feel it's hard because I just definitely feel the tension that exists. Like, there's just no right way to be, as especially a woman. There's no perfect way to be. People have a lot to say about how you talk, what you say, what the type of like the relative importance of the type of topics you choose to consume. And it is exhausting to be on the receiving end of it. And it's hard to sometimes take a deep breath and be like, this is not everyone else's experience, and my job is to represent them, not me.
Yeah. And I think something, I'm sure Taylor feels this way. I'm sure we've felt this way before too. When you do see criticism about yourself, it's always like, ooh, is one person saying this and they're the voice of 50 silent people?
Totally.
Or is this just the loudest, most unhinged voice ever and the opinion doesn't matter, or like doesn't matter? But who knows? Also, Taylor gets criticism from like people on Twitter, and then also like, I don't know, Rolling Stones critics and things like that. So I'm sure that's different, because I don't think anyone's ever from the New York Times has been like, this podcast sucks ass. I'd be like, what?
Hey, what the heck?
Yeah, I'd feel like that's brutal. I want to tell you about Every Plate. I had always been curious about different meal kits, just the concept of them. I'd seen them around, and I had wondered, A, which one should I pick, and B, would I even be into this? I find myself loving Every Plate for a reason that I don't hear most people talking about, which is I am cooking for one a lot of times, and if I want to try out a fun new recipe and it needs a dollop of mustard, I don't want to have to buy an $8 thing of mustard that I might not ever use again. So I love meal kits for the way that they provide exactly the right amount of ingredients that you need for every meal. And what sets Every Plate apart from any other meal kit is that they are the lowest price point out of any meal kit you're basically ever going to find. I remember thinking that meal kits were going to be expensive, but now I'm convinced that you can really have delicious meals at a much lower price. So you can get your first box for just $1.49 per meal if you go to everyplate.com and you enter code FLUENTLY149. That's everyplate.com and you enter code FLUENTLY149.
Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
My friend Sammy thinks that, and this is maybe like common knowledge in the blind item world, that like the weird marketing agency from the UK that posted the private jet ranking was some like Kris Jenner effort. Do you think that? Because it was right after Kylie got called out.
Blind items don't say that it was Kris Jenner, but I think it's a popular internet rumor, and I wouldn't be surprised if like someone behind the scenes was sending that in. And you have to admit, God, did it work. But I would also think too, Taylor Swift was number one far and away, right? Like, I think there were some guy, I think Steven Spielberg was under her, like Dwayne The Rock Johnson. So it was like her and then maybe 6 people before it got to the Kardashians. But Taylor Swift was like double the number 2 person. So it sounds like it was Kardashians because it's like, oh, Kylie's bad, but Taylor's worse. And instead it was like, no, Taylor's worse than everyone by like a factor of a lot. So I think that could have just been... There's also, it's interesting how there is that trend of celebrity jet trackers and Elon Musk being furious that it exists. And it's just like funny. It's like, oh, wow, you have these, $1 million machines that take you anywhere and pollute the environment, but you get mad when we track them. Like,
I know. It's so stupid. I know. And the other thing I wanted to ask you is your feed like inundated with Gaylor content?
It is, and
Do you talk about that on your podcast?
Oh, big time. And now I'm kind of
Okay.
like, maybe we shouldn't have, because I feel like it's getting out of hand. I saw what you put on your Instagram story the other day, and I so agree. Like, I got into the whole Gaylor thing really when I saw Taylor Swift hanging out with Karlie Kloss, and I was like, I think I've seen this film before in my own life. And I was like, oh, seems a little bit familiar. And then, of course, there's the master posts and things like that. And for me, it was also the lyrics. I'm like, Taylor Swift is a smart girl. If she has all these songs about if society found our love, it would be ruined, and people can't find out. If they find out, we're ruined. And some people could be like, oh, that's about the paparazzi finding out your relationship. She's a smart girl. Why would half of her discography be about the paps finding your relationship? So to me, just
dancing
all
with
of those...
our hands tied is not about a heterosexual. There's just no way in my world it would be about.
I don't want you like
the
a best friend.
Deep fears that the world would divide us. Yeah, reputation is just is the wild card for me. Where I was like, I think you're trying. If you don't see queer undertones in this, you're trying hard not to. But the other albums and her being with Joe first, I think you actually. Oh, now I'm realizing. Okay, you did say this recently that the part that turns me off and the reason I just never talk about it is because I don't like when people say that Joe's a beard or the relationship isn't real, because that gets into a place of like. So she does this documentary and she says she's in love and explains why she wants to keep it private, and like she's very clearly in this relationship. I can't imagine how crazy I would feel if my fans were like, you're lying. Like, there was weirdness about Hiddleston. There was weirdness about Calvin Harris. I don't even think she would deny that. But I think this is quite real. And, like, I want to be respectful as a human. And I think that that's where I got really turned off and just stopped talking about it when they clearly weren't friends anymore, her and Carly, when she got married, had a baby. And I was like, I just don't... this is such old news. This is so 2014. Like, why are we still talking about Carly?
100%. And I think maybe because of TikTok, the community's gotten a lot bigger, and I've just been seeing like the craziest videos coming up. Even with the title that she released last night, Mastermind, I saw people being like, so gay. I'm like, what's gay about Mastermind? I'm like, we're taking it too far. There are some things, I don't want you like a best friend. She's not singing about Ed Sheeran, folks, like who's her male best friend that she's hanging out with all the time? I've never seen him.
But can it be like chill that you explore your sexuality or you hook up with your friend, or like, I think that the attention drawn to it is like the heart of the problem.
Yeah, and anyone who talks in absolutes too. And I think of this too, like some people get so mad at me with blind items, and I'm like, I think it's more like I talk about blind items and I never judge people because I assume that these could all be rumors and fiction until one day they come true, and then we're like, ooh, 0.1 for blind item. But yeah, some people get so mad, and I'm like, you don't know if she's married to Joe. You don't know if she's gay. You don't know if she's still a virgin and all of this weird stuff. She is a stranger. So like, so long as it is a fun way to listen to her music and over happy hour with friends, you guys talk about theories, that's cool. But I think if you're dedicating hours to your life to like, I'm going to die on my hill that this is happening, it's like, ooh, we got to get some hobbies,
I felt during the Lover era, I thought there's never, I don't know if you were deep in it then, but like there was never a time that it would have made more sense to come out than You Need to Calm Down America. And it never happened. And then after that, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just going to enjoy the music.
That's also why I think too, like it's the biggest sign. Oh, is Taylor Swift a little bit queer or fully queer in some way? Yes, because she only speaks out about issues that affect her, which are women's issues and LGBTQ issues. So, like, that's the biggest marker, is the fact that that's what she decided.
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, because, like, when has Taylor selflessly been like, you know what? Flint, Michigan, and the water. It's like, it's never, it's only stuff that affects her. And also, if she is straight, that music video is a hate crime. She's like pushing queer people out of the way so she can take center in the video. It's like, if she's straight, the video is not good.
But don't you think there's something so fascinating about how she does enough that it could be true, but says enough so it could be false?
Yeah, because people have quotes on. So the Gaylors have the quote where she said, "Gay pride makes me me," and then the Hetlers have the quote where she said, "I didn't realize until recently that I could advocate for a community I'm not a part of." And these two vague quotes just go to head in the battle dome, and each person's like, "She literally said she's gay. She literally said she's straight," and like she's never said anything either way.
And I think that is where she does know what she's doing. Not necessarily that she would deliberately queer bait, but like
Well,
I
if
felt
Ginny and Georgia upset her enough to tweet, she could definitely
right.
tweet about this.
She could have, yes. There are endless, and she did shut it down after Kissgate or whatever. And I think people really hold on to that. But that was one of the first and only times she really said anything. And I felt the same way watching her at TIFF say the all too well scarf was a metaphor. She said enough to imply that it could be virginity, but not enough to definitively confirm it. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, I'm like, she just still knows how to play this game very well, where she says enough to get us talking, but not enough that would ever like condemn or pigeonhole her into one thing definitively being true. It's always flexible enough where the discourse will breathe. Yes. And it makes her relevant.
100%. Because I think these I just did an episode that's going to be Patreon soon on the whole Larry theory, and that because you know I've heard whispers of Larry but never done a deep dive into it. And the girl Katie that I was talking to was like, well, they've never tweeted anything about it. Like it would be very easy. It's been 10 years. Like I think like Louis said one tweet about something being bullshit, and then it's like, but in different interviews where they bring it up, like you just have to wonder, are they not saying something on purpose because they know, oh, maybe this is like 8% of my fan base?
Well, that's the other thing too, per the FYP of it all. I remember in the Lover era talking to like friends who were casual fans being like, well, she's obviously, you know, making a statement, or not coming out, but like saying I'm a part of this. And they were like, what are you talking about? She's just like, it's like you going to a pride parade. And I was like, oh, I don't see it that way. And then you realize that you are part of a narrow community that sees everything through this lens. But I will say the past few months, the mainstreamification of Gaylor is surprising to me, to the point where Rolling Stone would be writing about it, which is just different.
And then she did an exclusive photo with Rolling Stone. So it's not like that relationship has been severed since the article.
Right. So I guess I'm always just kind of wondering why it can't be casual. Like, I feel like Harry Styles' sexuality is casual. Like, it's, you know, like the at least my perception as a casual fan, because I'm not like a diehard Harry Styles fan, but as a passerby, it just seems like there's an accepted level of fluidity. No? Is that like the wrong take?
Well, that's what I would say. Have you heard the theory that she was going to come out during Lover?
No.
So
I mean, I thought she would, but I haven't heard of why people think she wouldn't have.
Yeah, so that's kind of, you know, the vibes, right? Me out now. And the You Need to Calm Down music video. But there was this theory, and some blind items also allude to it, that she was going to come out as sexually fluid. Now, that I don't know if I believe, because I think Taylor Swift wouldn't use a label that has sexually in it, but who knows. But that she was going to come out as that during Lover, but that was when her masters got taken from her. And you know that the minute Taylor Swift would ever come out as fluid, everyone's going to flock to albums 1, 2, 3, all of the old ones, and listen to them with an ear open to think, what if this is about a girl? And that would just mean that Scooter would be making millions of dollars from people re-listening to this. So I think if she ever does make a statement about her sexuality, she's not going to do it until all of those re-records are happening. Because, you know, even if I wasn't a fan, I'd be creepy enough to be like, oh my God, Taylor Swift said that she's queer. Let me go listen to Shoulda Said No and imagine if she was singing it about a girl and see if this lines up and get all detective-y.
I mean, if I wanted to tinfoil hat, I would say she released her 2 straightest albums, or re-records.
Oh, that's true. I thought you were going to say Folklore and Evermore, and I'm like, I think that there were some very gay ones on there.
No, I think Fearless was like very young, high school boy crazy, and I think Red was very, like, I know people have different things to say, but I think the Jake G thing was very real to her. Big age gap. He was such a big celebrity. She felt inferior. Like, I do think the Red experience was very real to her. But yeah, I mean, with that knowledge, would people view Speak Now differently? For sure. Would people view Reputation differently? Like we already did. Like, yeah, if you listen to Reputation through that lens, it's impossible not to see it.
And those albums are the bit, right? Like Speak Now and the debut album didn't really have any songs that super made it to the radio hits. When people think of her, they think of We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together, Love Story. They do think of hits off of those first two albums. So yeah, strap that tinfoil hat on. Mine's already to the moon.
Oh, I know. And it's like this weird thing where 1989, when you think of like even just opening with Welcome to New York, Boys and Boys and Girls and Girls, ending with the bonus of Wonderland, that was kind of just like a start of a little bit more of transparency if you're like well versed in that world. But I get why people don't see it if they're not familiar with it. And all the while I feel so guilty and weird speculating about somebody's sexuality. But then part of me feels like, well, it's also totally fair to take any narrative from any lyrics, because if you believe love is love, then if you see this song as representing you through the lens of being a queer woman, like you should be able to observe and own that narrative and not have people criticize you for it.
Yeah.
But you don't want to out people. You know, I think it's one of the most, to use an appropriate word, delicate conversations that I never know how to handle publicly. But it's hard to, and I dropped it for a while, but at this point it's like everywhere. But I don't know if it's everywhere or just on my For You page.
I think, and one day I want to set up like a table on the West Side Highway and just poll people as they go by and be like, have you heard the theory that Taylor Swift could be queer? Just like man on the street and be like, I just want to get the actual numbers because like I'm going crazy.
My professional opinion is that is a brilliant show concept that you should entertain, because I think that we do not know the relative insularity of our worlds at all. And I think it might shock people. I think it would help how people politically identify, because you're like, you know, people in major urban areas, it's like you don't know a single Trumper. And then you hear over half the country voted for him. You're like, huh?
Yeah.
It's good for us to be aware.
To like Illinois, and we're like, now we ask people here what they think about Taylor Swift and Garlic.
I'll be your Illinois branch.
There we go. I just have one last question here for you. This is something I get deeply paranoid about. Do you ever fear that Taylor will hear you saying something negative about her and the chance of a secret session is off the table?
Okay, so at first, maybe. At this point, I don't think a secret session serves me, because, like, I almost think to do our job, we need a level of separation.
Yes, yeah.
Like, I don't want to be Icarus flying too close to the one or whatever. Like, I don't want to be like a person that has one foot in her favor or approval that at the expense of my honesty. And as much as I'd love as a person, not a podcaster, to experience a secret session, I don't think anybody with any sort of medium like this would ever be invited. But if I was, I would be the type of person to like steal a tiny soap from her bathroom. You know, like if she has any awareness of me, she knows not to trust me. And I love her, and I probably always will. But I also don't think that, like, I think that the blessing and curse of a secret session is that people are so envious of it, they resent it. Yeah. And I don't want that for me or my content, because I want to be able to speak about it objectively. And if she acknowledged me, I might be worse at my job. What do you think?
I would agree with you on that. It makes me feel better about knowing that I literally will never, ever get invited. I also think, you know, maybe they'll probably never happen again. I do find it cuckoo that she took the top 0.1% of fans and invited them to my house. I always say, if I was her, I would take those top 0.1% and get a restraining order against all of them, because I am top 10%. And I'm psycho for her. Like, I'm full on psycho. I would be stealing pieces of her hair on the floor, like crazy, crazy town. So I don't know. They must have done some good vetting and had security, but I'm just like, I know how creepy I would be in that house. And I know that I'm not the top 1% of her fans.
Right.
So I can't even fathom what like the top most dedicated people were doing. I would be scared of them.
Well, isn't there like an element of evil genius too, to rewarding people that are unequivocally positive about you?
And they also all had like massive Twitter or Tumblr followings. It is a great marketing little scheme. Yeah.
It's brilliant. And like, but yeah, I'm with you. I think sometimes the biggest fans are the ones you need to like be a little bit mindful of. But I also would ask you too, though, especially with the knowledge that like you're a 4, because we're putting ourselves in boxes. I have this, I'm a fan, but not a fangirl. Like if I'm in a situation where I'm amazed and astounded by somebody's presence, I almost shut down. Like I don't physically respond. I don't cry. I'm just kind of like, I almost act like I don't care is my response, because I think that I malfunction. So if I was in Taylor Swift's house smelling a Byredo candle and eating her cookies, I think I'd short circuit. Like I just wouldn't be.
Well, also the whole time, I wouldn't even be having fun, because the whole time I would be like, I want her to like me. And it would be like,
yes,
dude, she's not going to like you or hang out with you after this. So you might as well have fun with the other people and just listen to the music. But the whole time I would be like, it would be like the worst first date ever, where I would be like, I need to like smile and nod at everything, because like we could be friends. And it's like, no, we won't.
I've the amount of times I've cosplayed this in my head of what it would feel like to be at a secret session. And I'm like, we would be older probably than most of the people.
100%. I'm
and
like,
a
you
lot
want to see
of the
some
fanfare would be embarrassing. Yes, it'd be like a little embarrassing. Like sometimes when I watch people fawn over somebody, I'm like, oh, stop. So yeah, when I say I've thought about it, I have, but I also, yeah, is my logic a coping mechanism? Probably, maybe. Yes. But it's like, I think sometimes I wish that, like, if she was going to recognize people that talk about her a lot, I think a fun thing to do would be like to invite them to shows, but not to meet her. Like it would be nice if my seats weren't so bad at the concerts, because I do devote a lot of airtime to her. But that's the only thing I would ever really be excited for.
Yeah, no, that's a great compromise. Or like a little bit of free merch, because like I don't think I would be spending $60 on a pool floaty, but if I got one for free, I would certainly
promote the hell out of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd even get one of those keychains. I'd be like, dingle dingle, on my way to picking up my birth control. I'd be like, I don't even care.
Fuck the patriarchy. Ever heard of it?
Fuck the patriarchy. That's what I'm doing. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Also, can you tease a little bit or tell anyone about the book that I know that you're working on?
Yes. I'm writing a book about the female millennial zeitgeist, and it's kind of in an effort to speak from experience of the things that I always wanted to celebrate, but felt I had to downplay in the presence of a lot of people, especially men, commenting on their frivolity and talking about the things that shaped us in popular culture, in our interpersonal culture, in just the culture of things from like how women were spoken about in the 90s to evolving to the manic pixie dream girl to the not like other girls to the pick me girl. It's like, speaking of boxes, it's like I think we all spent so long trying to find the one we fit in. We never even like defined ourselves on our own terms. And a lot of older millennial women now look back on their stories and experiences and are completely reframing the way they experienced everything, because we grew up in a culture of aggressive sameness. And now we live in a world that celebrates people who are unique. And where does that leave us and how to feel about ourselves? And I think we all contain a lot of multitudes, and we don't always get to celebrate them. And especially really smart, sharp women that have a lot of sophisticated interests in social causes, people are quick to write that off if you like pop culture. And it's kind of a manifesto of like, millennials aren't necessarily what you say they are, and also like what you like. And these are all of the things that happen that might make us a product of our time. And you should go easier on yourself as a result.
Yeah, the way you talk about all those different stereotypes. Do you ever watch those YouTube videos from the channel The Take?
No.
Oh my God, they talk about different characters. So the manic pixie dream girl, or like the feisty Latina character, or things like that. You know, the popular jock or the mean girl, and they talk about these characters in all these different movies and TV shows and what they actually represent. I'm curious, like, is there one trope that you really, like, when I see manic pixie dream girl, I'm like, here, strap me in. I'm ready for this one. I relate to it. Is there a certain trope where you're like, oh, I always thought of myself as this?
I think that going through my life, I always felt so average and uninteresting that I was always chasing
even as
the
a
thing
4?
that. So that's what's so hard to explain. I felt like I like a lot of people, I feel this way. You have this complex inner world in your girlhood, but you're a product of your environment, and you feel the need to adapt to the least common denominator of what's socially acceptable. And whatever that was at the time is what I did.
Yeah.
So where that net out once I got older was like, I've always tried on different versions of myself for size to get the pre-approval of society that I already could anticipate instead of just like existed as I was. And so it's kind of like if you in your heart fall into a trope, great. But it's kind of an effort to think of yourself outside of the boxes, though I'd argue that we can't be criticized for how we decorate them because we never put ourselves in them to begin with. So whatever, it's kind of like just exist. Like I think the self-surveillance of women is exhausting and tremendous. And I don't care if you fall into a trope and are the biggest cliche in the world and are at a pumpkin patch with a pumpkin spice latte in an Ugg boot and a North Face Denali. Live your truth. And so should the person that rages against all of that. Like, I don't care. The ways we respond to and judge each other is a product of misogyny, and the only real protest is to exist.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'm trying to like think through my life and talk through. And like, it is hard when you're indoctrinated with like 90s and 2000s media that spoke about women in a way that's horrendous.
So much so. I look back on so many things, even just like 10, 15 years ago, and I'm like, that would never fly today. And only 10 years have gone by.
I know. I mean, to be like in high school and college, when every single cover of every tabloid was about if you are overweight, underweight, feuding with a friend, got broken up with, or bleary-eyed, tumbling out of Ledoux, that's what I thought my options were as a woman.
And then it was like, are you a pear or an apple? You pick one. You only get one
I
fruit.
could never figure out my goddamn body type.
Or my face shape. I spent so much being like, is it heart, oblong, oval? What are we working with here? What are we working with here? Just like desperate to try to find. I'll be like, maybe if I find my color season, then like everything will snap into place. And it's like, I don't know.
Right. Totally. And like, I feel very strongly about both rejecting the constant insistence by society of us to modify, self-improve, but also if that's something that brings you joy and you genuinely like we're a product of our environments, and like that's okay too. I just think the reason my career will probably never take off is because I'm not a person with hot takes. I live in the gray, and that's not popular. So.
No, it should be though. I always wished growing up too, like I feel like I remember clicking through news channels during COVID, and based on the politics of the news channel, you were getting two completely different stories. And I'm like, I know it doesn't make money to like be in the middle and talk about both sides and how this could be true, but this could also be true, but this came out, so who knows? I'm like, there's no money to be made from that. But like, I do think so many people are like, well, I think a little bit of this, but also a little bit of that, but I could see it going this way. And it doesn't, like the most controversial channels take off because they go viral and they're psycho. But like, I don't know, people just thoughtfully pondering things. Like, I do think that there's a market there. I hope at least.
And what I've found is that it's the nicest market there is to have as an audience, because once you kind of stop obsessing over growth and popularity and you like do what you like and what comes naturally to you, I found that in just going hard for the gray, I feel two ways, we contain multitudes, it kind of naturally casts off people that want you to have hot takes who would also have a hot take about you, and leaves you with a group of people that are pretty understanding about the nuance that exists within the human experience. Yes. So I'm all about like, let's normalize a medium amount of success. Like, I don't need to be the biggest podcaster.
I love, on my vision board, I'm like straight and narrow. Nothing too crazy. That's the vision.
Lukewarm airport to Sani. I'll take it if it's there. All right. It's not my number one.
And this book is it going to be coming out at midnight sometime soon? Sometime?
I don't have a release date yet. I'm still like in the thick of writing and editing it. Takes a long time. Didn't know. This is my second book, but first long form one, and it's taking me a while because I want to get it right. But all the while, per our conversation, it's very hard to freeze your opinions as finite takes, right? Yeah. In 2017, I would have written a book being like, hustle, grind, girl boss, and I've changed. So it's kind of a crazy experience. It's like kind of a time capsule that I might change my mind about. But yeah, so it'll come out sometime late next year. If you'll let me come back on, We'll talk more about it, and you'll have to come on my podcast sometime too. You were so nice to have me. I love your work. I love women who are smart and talk about things and use the social channels that can objectify us to inject nuance and thoughtfulness and analysis in the world. And I think you're awesome.
Oh, I like Amir right back at you. I'm so happy that we were able to talk, and I'm just like a massive fan of your podcast. It's always so thoughtful. It's always so clever. And I mean, I am a millennial. So yeah, exactly. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Shannon. Take care.